So gonna start the presented mode. All right, so this is the agenda for today. Um, I've seen a lot of new faces here, so probably when we start the group discussion, we can just have sort of intros, but we are gonna start right with some OSPO news from during that has been happening during this month. So first of all, we have new to-do members on board. One of them is GitLab, and the other one is BNB Karate. And you can find all the details in OSPO landscape. For those who doesn't know, there is an OSPO landscape for all these companies that are to-do group members, but also are OSPO adopters. So if by any chance you are in a OSPO and your company or your organization is not there, please just open a pull request and we will make sure to have your logo there. Next new, we have a new newsletter to talk about the OSPO ecosystem, OSPO News. People can sign up in the following link. And also, if people want to contribute to the upcoming newsletter, you can also go to GitHub, and there you can add your suggestions to grow this newsletter. It is launched every month, every last Tuesday of the month, so people is more than welcome to participate there. Next. There's going to be two upcoming events, OSPO events. The first one is going to be OSPOCon, and for those who doesn't know, we already published the schedule and the talks. You can follow this link to see what's going on there. And for that's going to be happen in September. And then the next OSPOCon is going to be an OSPOCon Europe happening in UK. And that's going to be in October. And the schedule, we are still working on it. We are still reviewing. There was a lot of people that sent us some couple papers, and we are in the process of reviewing it. So that will be coming soon. Next of all, we have a new OSPO guide for people who doesn't know. The tutor group has a section where we have guides on how to start an OSPO and how to manage OSPOs. So this guide is focused on organizing and managing open source events. Just go there and take a look. And we also have a new section, OSPO discussions. Here, the main goal of OSPOlogy is, of course, to talk about issues that OSPOs are facing right now, but sometimes people doesn't want to talk or participate here, and that's completely fine. But maybe they have some issues that they would like to get some answers about that from the community. So this is the right place to have that happening. So we had our first discussion, and you can also send yours. And that's all for today's news. What we're gonna do is start with the OSPO of the month. Every month we invite some of the tutor group members to talk about their OSPOs and what are they doing, and also talk about the main topic. This topic, for those who doesn't know, is how to start an OSPO. And the OSPO of the month is Bloomberg, and you can find all the details and check bloomberg.com and their GitHub. So today's guests are Alisa Wright and Kevin Fleming. And I don't know if Alisa has been able to. She had some issues with their camera and their mic. So I don't know if she has been able to fix that. I guess Kevin, he already has Grants and he can talk and we can see him. I'm not sure about that. Let me. Yes.
Yep, I'm here. Yep.
Awesome. So let's just move forward. And Kevin, it's all yours. You can start your presentation.
Sure. Yep.
And thank you so much.
Yep. Go ahead.
Yep.
So, hello everyone. A lot of names of people I recognize on the participant list. So, hello to all of you that we haven't seen for a while due to travel and all of that kind of stuff. A little bit of background about what we do. When it was because the company had decided that they needed a group of at least one person anyway to help the engineering collaborate with open source communities and important to the company. And so I was lucky enough to get this position to do this and collaborate with a group of other great people. Some gone to other roles now, and so we've got other great people who are in those roles as well. But so, as Anna mentioned, we hired a second person who's Alyssa, who's unfortunately, as I mentioned, unable to get her video and audio working directly, but she's furiously typing in the chat, so say hello to her there if you like. If you want to go to the next slide. Can you do that, or do I need to do it?
Oh, sorry.
There we go. Yep. So we do lots of things, as many of you who are familiar with what OSPOs do. The 50 or more of us that are in the to-do group, none of us have exactly the same remits as to what we're responsible. Getting some echo there. Okay, great. So I listed the most important we're responsible for here, and some of them are the fairly obvious things you would expect. So we use a great deal of open source software at Bloomberg, both in infrastructure and in our products and in our public-facing services and all kinds of things. And so we want to make sure that we are good, helpful communities that produce that software, contribute back when we can, answer questions and all those kinds of things. Since many of our engineering teams don't have experience collaborating with open source communities, that's actually a training role for us, is to teach them that what way to contribute to these communities and participate and be seen as a helpful member of the community, and not, for example, just a big company coming along and beating a drum saying we're a bit we want to do. The second thing that we do is we also make the company's engagements with major open source groups, foundations, and other organizations. Obviously, Linux Foundation, but many others include Apache Software Foundation and Python Software Foundation, and many others. So we make sure that when those organizations that are supporting communities that are important to us are providing resources to those communities. In the case of the Apache Software Foundation, they provide lots of technical resources, source code repositories, and all kinds of other things. And we want to make sure that they need to keep the projects we care about moving along quickly, and all those kinds of things. And then when we get to the point where our engineering teams have not just become members of it, start contributing back to it, the ones also who help them figure out what the right way to do that is. So are the things they want to contribute appropriate to contribute? Are they the things that the community would like to see in their project? Obviously, there are always complicated legal and licensing issues that have to be addressed. Participate in those things as well. And then we also manage to produce software as open source software. We are certainly not the most prominent publisher of open source software in the technology by a long shot. We have had a few small successes, though. In the past year and a half, we've had a few projects that have point where they had significant enough communities that they could graduate being a Bloomberg project and actually join a foundation. One more of those right now. So those are really nice things to see. It means that something that we've created or had a large role in the creation of is something the community really cares about and wants to own, and it graduates beyond being just a Bloomberg project. And then finally, as everybody who runs an OSPO will tell you, one of the roles we get to do, of course, as well as helping to make decisions about open source software that
into the company.
And that can be simple things like just making sure that the licenses are compatible with our intended usage, but they can be much more complex things. And for example, some of the projects Alyssa has been working on recently is doing a review of the posture of a community. What does their governance look like? What does the contributor and maintainer community look like? And we have public meetings like they're supposed to have, and all of those kinds of things. Those are important sorts of due diligence things to do when you're going to make a strategic decision to use an open source project. They're somewhat do if you were deciding to buy software from a company who was going to enter software or a service. You want to understand what's the stability of that company. How long are they going to be around in 5 years and still be able to support us? Want to have those same kinds of answers for open source projects too. You can go to the next slide, Anna.
Yep.
So as you can imagine, with all those different roles, we work with lots of people all over the company. The really obvious things, of course, would be the engineering organization, since that's where most of the open source activity happens. But we have to deal with the legal team as well because of, again, like copyright issues. There are also lots of open source projects that are either or are operated by organizations that require some form of contributor agreement when you want to become a contributor to those projects. To have our legal team review and decide if the terms are acceptable for us, and then get them signed so that we can manage the contributions. And then in cases where we are directly funding development in an open source project, which we do in a number of different areas, those would then be SOW, scope of work documents, with either consultants that are doing the work for us or companies that operate those projects and things like that. So there's a lot of interaction with our legal team, and the procurement team, I guess I should have put in there as well, since they're involved in those things. Communications is very important. You want to tell the world what you're doing and what kind of successes you've had and how much you appreciate all the stuff that your company is able to make use of and all the cool stuff that happens out there. So obviously that's social media and blogs, this webinar, and all kinds of other things along those lines. That blends over into marketing. One of the things that our team does, but not every OSPO does, is we manage sponsorships of technical conferences that the company. Those are in a large number of different domains. They're in network infrastructure, science, and programming languages, and all kinds of things. And so we help decide which conferences we should sponsor, what our sponsorship level should be, to make sure that if we're going to sponsor a conference, that we get the most value out of doing that, and that the community that runs the conference gets the most benefit from our sponsorship as well. And then the last things there are, obviously we're in the CTO office. I should have mentioned that in the first slide, but so we collaborate with other teams in the CTO office as well. And then on the people operations side, which not every company calls it that, a lot of the motivation for doing these things to ensure that when someone is interested in employment as a software developer or a network infrastructure engineer or whatever other kind of technical role that they might be in modern times, many of those are very open source literate. They may already be significant contributors of an ongoing relationship with open source projects. And they want to know that a company that they might work for is also that way, is not only going to continuing to do those things, but also that the company that is a contributor to projects and is a good open source citizen. So we work with our recruiters that message gets out, and that when a candidate has difficult questions that the recruiters don't know about how our policies work or what they're allowed to do or not, we're here to help them and make sure that those questions get answered and the person has a positive feeling about what they would be able to do. Join us. Okay, I think we're almost to the left. Maybe there's one more. I think there's one more.
Yep.
As I said, started in 2012, so we're approximately 9 years old now. At the beginning, very few people who were contributing as Bloomberg employees to open source projects. That's now a number I can't even count. It's definitely in the low hundreds, let's say somewhere between 200 and 300. So that's a really promising thing. And some of those are small contributions, and some of them are people who contribute to the same project every day. That's actually their job, to work on that project. Everything across the spectrum there. As I mentioned, we've had some projects that have originated at Bloomberg but have become community-owned projects, and more of those well. And then we have really succeeded in open source communities in becoming a brand, a name that people recognize because of our contributions to the projects, not because we just spend a lot of marketing money, but because of the actual contributions to the projects. And that has had really good success. We've actually had people who were looking for new jobs reach out directly to our community, our that already participate in that project without even going to recruiting or the careers website or anything else and saying, hey, you guys do some really great stuff in Apache Solar or whatever the project might be. Are you hiring? Are you looking for people who will work on that software? And obviously that's a great way to get people into your organization. They're already interested in the same things you are, community that you participate in. So they're clearly someone who's interested in this kinds of things that you are. And then the last thing, and for those of you who've known me for a while, I've been beating this drum for a long time. As an enterprise contributor, it can be sometimes difficult to make contributions to projects if they have a very difficult process for accepting contributions. For example, contributor agreement that has to be reviewed and signed and things like that. So every time I get the opportunity, I try to work with those groups to make their process more straightforward and we don't want friction, right? The goal is you want the contributions to make their way into the project, and this friction can slow down, and we're obviously as we can. So yeah, that's kind of a quick summary of who we are. I see there's a couple questions in the chat. Sami, so the answer to your question is there are two of us, and we're both here. So Alyssa and I are the two that are Bloomberg's open source program office. I wish we had more people, but we're not at the point yet. But we probably directly or indirectly, I would say probably about 1,000 to 1,500 people in our engineering organization, which is only a engineering organization, but a lot of them don't have any interaction with open source software at all. So, so they're not necessarily groups. But I wish we had more, but you know, that will come with time. As we have more successes, we will get more resources, and we'll grow from there. So.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
Enrique's got a question. Hello.
Oh, awesome.
Oh, what were the top challenges? The very first challenge coming into a situation like this is understanding what already exists, going and finding the teams that are already using and may already be communicating with projects outside the company, just so you can understand that the first thing what you don't want to do is have the very first things that you do productive things that are already working. You don't want to be the reason why someone has to stop doing the thing that they're already doing. So that was the first, to try to understand the landscape inside the company, what was already being used, what people were. And then the next steps are, okay, what can you find that's common across all of activity? Can you start to write policies or procedures or processes or something that reflect what people are already doing, so that the next group who wants to do the same thing, you have a recipe for them to follow. It's not unique every time a group wants to do something. Actually, one of the things Alyssa has been working on since she joined, which is sort of reviewing all this documentation that I've written over these many years to make sure that it makes sense for someone who isn't me. You know, when you write your own document, sometimes you write it for yourself, and then the next doesn't quite understand what was in your head. So those are definitely some challenges started. And then I'll answer this question from Edward. Alyssa, you've got one from Chris. This are in the office of the CTO, so it never existed in any other part of the company, and that's primarily because our office of the CTO we're sort of an organization on the side the company. We just support every part of the company. So it makes sense for our OSPO to be there, because the OSPO to support many organizations all across the company. So that made sense for us to be there.
Hi all, can you hear me? Success. Thanks, Chris, for the question. For me, I started just a couple months ago, and have been like part of the journey to, I think, assist in many of these processes and build like relationships with internally and with the open source like projects that we're using has been like both a survey that we put together to understand where people are with both the involvement in open source technologies and use of open source technologies, as well as like speaking to a lot of people. And so to your question about security specifically, I mean, Kevin can clearly talk a lot more about this. I have been in a space of learning about what it means to have to have secure open source technologies and technical use within like the context of the organization that I'm part of. So it's been an interesting journey for me to talk to people who are kind of like balancing security concerns and like growing security concerns and open source processes. It seems to be for them a unique balance. And from my perspective, I look forward to both evaluating open source technologies to see like where they fit into our security concerns and pipeline, and working with those people in particular so that security isn't what hinders our use of open source like technologies and bridging to open source communities. So I hope that answered some piece of the security aspect of all of this.
I'll add one more thing there to kind of help draw that line that Chris was asking about. I mean Melissa and myself, our role generally is not judgment on what the quality of a particular piece of open source software is. We're gonna focus what's the quality of its community and its governance and its how does its community produce, and of course the more factual things like legal and licensing and stuff like that. But as far as things like should we use that software or not, that's not necessarily one group that's going to be a part of that discussion. And so then our security teams would be looking for how often has it had security vulnerabilities, and how quickly do the team respond and produce new releases, and all of those kinds of things. We don't get involved in that part of it. That's what our risk and compliance and security teams do. So we collaborate on those decisions quite a bit.
And from what I again continue to learn and empower those people to make decisions where open source health is considered in their decisions.
Thank you so much. I've seen a lot of more questions. The next one is from Sami. How can we convince senior management there is more investment needed for OSPO to succeed further?
I wish I knew the answer to that question. Having just doubled our team size within the last few months, I feel like I've had great success there recently. But you're absolutely right. There's always more and more and more. So one of the things that's a challenge, and I've heard other people in the open source space talking about this, is trying to come up with some estimation of how much value your company is the open source software that it uses. Because if you can do that, you can sort of think about how much it would cost you to produce that yourself. And if you can then say, okay, this is how much we spend producing all of where we're using the software, but you didn't have to produce it, then maybe you can say, okay, if we've saved, let's pull a random number out of the air, if we've saved $10 million this year by software to solve problems that we didn't have to write our own software for or paying a vendor for, what's a reasonable percentage allocate to supporting those projects to make sure that the next time we want to save $10 million by using open source software, that software exists and it's ready for us to use. So that's a conversation everybody across the open source community is still having. How do you quantify the value that you're getting by using open source software? And Chris can probably tell us there's things the Linux Fund to try to help quantify some of those things. If you can manage to do that within your organization, you might numbers and then go back to management and say, okay, this is how much we've saved. Let's turn some of that into investment. So
I've also been impressed with the conversation about like the ancillary benefits. Kevin pointed out that we work closely with the communications team. I think our involvement in open source communities finds valuable benefit with kind of our position and narrative, like in the technological spaces that we care about, as well as like hiring and like that type of pipeline. I think that not only their software like returns on investment, but also a bunch of other ancillary like benefit that we it looks like we're trying to quantify as well.
Thank you so much, Alice and Kevin. We're still having a couple more questions. Marika was saying that, they are starting on OSPO, and one of the main challenges he's finding is the low profile the organization wants to keep. Okay, so he says like having a public exposure is a cultural challenge, and if you have faced something similar in Bloomberg.
To some degree, yes, especially because the industry that Bloomberg is in, the financial services industry, tradition, the players in this space tend to be very closed about what technology use and how they apply them and all of those sorts of things. So I can still fondly remember the very first time we managed to get one of our technical staff members on a stage at a major conference to talk about us using a particular piece of open software. We really had to convince quite a few people that to go out there and really talk about that. In this case, it happened to be OpenStack. And none of you will be surprised to know that doing that resulted in great benefits back to us. There was press coverage of the fact that Bloomberg was on the stage talking about OpenStack and all these kinds of things. So it was a huge win in the end. But getting that hurdle of being permitted to talk about the tools that you use because to be to the benefit of your company in the end is definitely a challenge for a lot of companies. The closest to being a regulated company or being involved in government activities or anything, it gets harder and harder and harder because companies like that tend to be very, very closed about what they talk about. But we're getting, those of you who are participants in the to-do group Slack, you see there's lots of people there who actually do work at banks and other companies that have traditionally been like that, and they're making a big dent in.
And sorry, and if I can add to that, what's been amazing just starting is that people really do want to collaborate, like on a human level, and like both the warm welcome and the kind of interest and excitement to be speaking and working with people across these departments and concerns and and products have been like speak to me about an interest, particularly with like I think and a cultural interest of wanting to work like collaboratively and in a way that's reminiscent of traditional open source development. So and somebody pointed out to me that the cultural shift happens a lot with the younger people who are more familiar with working in an open source context, and so I think cultural change is we're in the midst of it, regardless of the industry we're part of. but I'm hopeful.
Sahira has asked a similar question, but I think this is more focused on if the company leadership was already convinced of the benefits of open source and OSPO, or if, on the other hand, was a big culture change and effort on your part to bring teams and managers along to working openly.
So I should say this is back when it was just me. The company had already decided they wanted to do this. And so they actually created a position to bring someone in from outside who could help create an OSPO. And that was the role that. So I did not have to do any convincing that having something like an OSPO was the right thing to do and benefit of the company. I do know that lots of my peers in other companies group have had that challenge. Some of them still do have that challenge. Unfortunately, I can't speak specifically to that because I didn't have to do that. They'd already decided that this was roughly what they wanted to do. They didn't really know what the specifics were. We're bringing somebody in to say, help us do this. And so that's what I did.
And she also said, and how far along are you on your cultural change goals, if you have any?
That is a good question. That's not something I've ever consciously thought about. Most of what has happened in the time has been, I guess. There are things that either are already happening and we need to understand how to make sure they're happening correctly, or there are new projects being launched and we need to make sure we know how to support them so that they do happen correctly. However, I can say we've had a couple of wins within the last year or two in actually getting company policies changed to make processes more friendly and things like that. So I think that would count as a culture change. Definitely, because we're a relatively old company, especially by tech company standards. We've been around 40 years, I think. So there's a lot of history and a lot of things that you have to teach people. There was no open source software to collaborate on 40 years ago. So there are company policies that have been around for a long time that sort of have to be thought as the world has changed around us and as the things that our engineering team members want to do have changed. We've had to make sure that we can describe to our management team to consider making those changes and what the potential both benefits and risks might be if we do.
And Justin says, how is Bloomberg addressing the open source supply chain security issue?
So actually, I saw the second part of that question, and I'm plugged here. Alyssa and I are actually 2.5 hours to talk about that exact topic, specifically with the Python Software Foundation, which Justin mentioned in the question. So I encourage you to maybe, if you've got time, go look it up. It's called the Upstream OSS webinar. It's in 2.5 actually. And that's exactly the topic we're going to be talking about, is the kinds of things we're doing to support the communities that produce the software that we use so that we can help to improve those.
I see one more question from Chris. That's from Kevin. Kevin, I know Bloomberg has a philanthropy arm that supports open source projects. Can you speak about the lessons learned there and how other companies can learn from
that? So we would say some success in working with our philanthropy team to support open source related activities. We haven't yet gotten open source software to be a well, they have lots of other things that they focus on already, but what we have been able to do is teach them about how open source software development is a public good. It benefits everyone. It's obviously educational and lots of other things. And as a result, for example, we've been able to now we've probably times organize events where we have members of our engineering team and students from nearby schools and possibly even existing community members of an open source project gather together for a day or two on a weekend along with maintainers of that project to get them taught how to contribute to that project and how to get patch submitted and merged and all those kinds of things. We haven't done one for a while. Obviously, the pandemic has been a bit of a block for that and other reasons, but we'll hope to start doing them again once we can start to do in-person events again. So that's a fun event to do, but one of the things that we were able to get there is, like many large companies, philanthropy or social type team will provide some kind of benefits to employees for volunteering their time. That can be, it could be increased compensation, other kinds of benefits or whatever. We have been able to get our philanthropy team to consider that time spent volunteering for a project to be volunteer time. So if someone comes in on a Saturday, for example, and spends 7 or 8 hours event helping new contributors learn how to contribute to Python, or they actually get to count that as 8 hours of volunteer time, just as if they'd gone out and do a beach cleanup or hundreds of volunteer activities that we do here. So then that means get to the benefit for them. In Bloomberg's case, if you volunteer 25 hours a year, then a choice where $2,500 US of the company's philanthropic giving is going to go. And if you get to 50 hours, then you get to do for $5,000. So a lot of employees, I mean, they do it just because they want to, but that's a nice side benefit that you get to this charity money goes to. So yeah, I would consider that a success. We have a philanthropy team that now understands why open source is important, both to Bloomberg and to our employees, and to the Bloomberg, to our employees, and to the rest of the world. And they help us. They help us wherever they can to make those things happen. So I don't know how much time. How much time did you allocate?
Yeah, so it's at 45 we will end, and I see 2 more questions. Well,
okay.
Well, just leave time for 2 more, because I know having Annalisa here is amazing, and a lot of people want to ask questions, but we have limited time. Sorry for that. Cornelius said, how are you dealing with automation and tooling challenges around open source? Do you have dedicated people for that, or is that part of what the engineering organization feels responsible for?
The latter. So we provide direction for what the engineering team needs to produce and maintain. I wish we had dedicated people in our team to just work on tooling. And maybe that's probably the next thing we'll try to get now that we've got a second team member to help on the more higher level initiatives and things like that. To that question before about how much can you convince the company to invest in, to all of the different things you need to be able to do your job efficiently. And we're making progress there. We're definitely making progress there. But we do rely mostly on our engineering team to provide those resources.
And last question, this is Marvika. So he says, going to collaborative software development topic. I don't know if Bloomberg manages development team members from different external providers. If so, how they manage to collaborate with open source? Do they do it, or are they just hired for a specific development without participating in open source communities?
Okay, so I guess what he's referring to there is, do we, contracting firms, right? So yes, we do. We do contract out development work to other companies that we work with that are extremely open source savvy, and we actually use them for that purpose. So for example, Igalia, which I think is based in Spain, we use for quite a lot of JavaScript and web browsing. We also use a company in the UK called CodeThink, which does a huge amount of open source software development for us. And so in many cases, we will actually just go to them and say, okay, we need you to just give us a couple people to learn how to contribute in this particular project and then help us get some of those kinds of things done. So as an example, we recently did some work with tooling that is in our Security Foundation, another LF project, to get a tool that Google had originally produced converted into something that could actually be run inside our network, as opposed to only being something that could be run in the Google. And we actually had CodeThink people do that work for us. It was all done in the open, all open source, just like you would want it to be. So we definitely do everything. I mean, obviously, we have contract developers that do proprietary work as well, but we go as far as just paying people to go work on open source. The right thing to do, and they already have the skills and experience. They can jump right in to the project. Whereas if we had one of our teams do it, it might take them a few months to become familiar with how to work in it. So yep, we do that as well.
Thank you so much. I think we don't have any more questions, and we can close this part. And yeah, thank you everyone. I think Chris already shared with you in the link the next OSPology. This is gonna be done monthly, and we will be having different topics. The next one is about mentoring and talent management within open source ecosystems. And the speakers that we will have as a guest will be announced soon. So we really hope to see you there. And again, thank you so much, Alisa and Kevin, for sharing your knowledge with us today. Thank you for being so patient with all the changes from one thing to another. I promise we will make sure this not gonna happen next time. So yeah,
great.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.